part of this theme day. Now I'm going to go through the process I used to make a 3D environment scene. Oh, come on. Let's see. Sure. Where this is the end result. So I will do this the same way I did the other one. I will just go briefly through the process and show you all the steps I made. I started by gathering references of what kind of stuff that inspired me in terms of design, light scenarios. Like these images here were the biggest inspiration because I really like this light through the walls kind of feeling. It kind of gives a very natural look, but also a bit of horror, and that's kind of a mood I want in my final piece. And it's important to look for these references because you don't really think of these design choices for lighting unless you find a picture of it first. Then I do quick thumbnail sketches that look like shit, but that's fine because they're not really for presenting to anyone other than myself. It's just quick ways to explore different designs, camera angles, and kind of figure out what you don't like as much as what you do like. And it's easy to then just eliminate and kind of, okay, these are the 4 directions I like to go with, and I ended up going for the first one here. But then I start to just block it out in 3D, just to get the perspective right and the scaling right. And then I will just sketch on top, throw some photos in, and kind of just explore. It doesn't look like anything really, but it's just for me to throw ideas around. And I really like the ideas of having these lanterns in this position because it kind of creates a shape here that you don't really think of, but you kind of see it, this triangular shape, and it adds perspective. And that's just something you want to play with as early as possible to kind of get an idea of what you want. I think this is the final illustration I ended up with, and it's not pretty, but it's enough to get me going because now I have a clear direction of where I want to go. If I were wiser, I would start actually designing the props because you can see it's still just blocking in and get the mood right, but I don't really know how to model this travel case, for instance, because it's not really clearly defined how it's actually made. I then start to block it in 3D even further, and I'm just using simple geometry. And because I know that once I have a placeholder for everything, I have a clear vision of how much do I actually have to model and what works and what doesn't, and I can figure out problems early on. It's like I had a few skulls in my shelf here, but I just used some chopped off heads from a mesh I had earlier just to put them there as a placeholder. I also try to play around with lighting as early as possible to see if there are any challenges that you didn't think of until you actually try to put the lights there. And see if you can achieve the mood with the smallest amount of lights as possible. If you can make it work in the blockout phase, then you will know it looks great in the final phase as well. So I try to get the thing with the light shining through the walls. I will go more in depth on how I actually modeled the walls later on. I put in these base meshes for a human character, and as they're modeled to scale, just to get a sense of how everything else are proportioned in relationship to these characters. And this is the final result as it worked up to it. So when I start making this environment, I first think of the boundaries of the scene. I want to define the walls and the space I have to play with, as if it was a real-life set you want to make props in. It's like you don't really want to make a movie set by placing the table first. You make the walls and then put the table inside the room. But the problem I think many people have with environments is that it's often much stuff in an environment, and you don't really know how to start because it's a bit much. And you think, oh, am I going to model each of these sticks individually? No. You usually don't. So let's see if I can find, let's see. When you make environment pieces, reference like how you organize your files is more important because there's a lot of assets you want to keep in control of. And I usually have an asset folder where I make a folder for each of the different props. And as I model the blockouts, the placeholder files, let's see, need to set the project here. Desktop. There we go. So I keep all the props in separate scenes to start with. So I have a scene just for this bed. And it allows me to kind of push this bed, like make the details as far as I want on its own scene. If every prop is in its place in the scene, it's very difficult to model because they might be rotated at an angle that makes it really difficult to work with the right angles. And when you can separate these assets into different files, it's much easier to kind of keep it organized. And you can kind of return to it and, no, I need to work on this bed a bit more, and then you open the file and then just re-import it into the scene file. Let's see. It's going to take a moment to load up because it's quite a heavy scene. And depending on your own computer, you might have to try to be as cautious as possible when deciding how heavy you want to have each asset. I made this at a computer at school, which has like 64 gigabytes of memory, so I didn't pay much attention to that. But it might cause me issues now that I'm using this computer with 8 gigs of memory. So let's just hope for the best. So this is the base, like the model I would start with first to block in, because these are the boundaries. But I wouldn't really make these sticks each on their own. I'll see if I can find a model I started with for this. Anyway, for a scene like this where I have a lot of the same object duplicated over and over, I would start a file that serves as a kit bash file. So if I want to make a stick, I would make a cylinder and model that to scale. Let's see. So I've just placed a cylinder here, and this will be, for now, one stick. This will be stick number 2, and stick number 3. And then we'll basically just go in and make slight changes to one. Same with this. Bit different shape. I would work like this until I had like different, unique models for each of these. So if like these branches here that are the vertical ones, I would perhaps make 5 different versions of this, and then when I came to making the whole scene, I would just duplicate it over and kind of vary them around a bit. This can be rotated so they don't all face the same side. And for this, you can see it's just the same cylinder duplicated over with some slight deformations on it. Then I group them together, and then I just put them into place. So the good thing about this is that if you make a kit that has only the essential, like 5 branches, 5 bamboo sticks, and then like 5 smaller branches that you can construct the whole hut with, you can have them all share the same UV tile, so you only need one texture map to make the textures for the whole hut. And so it's really easy to make changes to the textures and work iteratively when you know they're made from the same base components. It's pretty much just like making your own advanced Lego bricks and then kind of construct the scene with them. And if I had this, since I work with different Maya files for each of the different props, I can use something that is called referencing to import them without breaking, like, I can import the Maya file, but I can work on the separate Maya file, and the changes I do to that file will be reflected in this scene file. So let's see. Go in and create reference and go to the assets. Oh, that's the wrong folder. Let's see. Set projects. That's it. Let's try it. Create reference and go to the assets and make, let's import the set. I think I used this one. Yeah. So now I have everything imported from that file. And you will see this like diamond shape on the object, which means that it's a reference. So if I open this file I referenced into the other, in a different Maya window, I can make changes and just save over and refresh, and it will update. Let's try to do that with the bed. So if we open this, I think I imported this one. So if I make any changes to this, let's say center pivot, just something to easily see that something has been done. And then we can save scene as, asset bed. What did I do to it? There we go. Give it a new version name. And then we can go to reference editor. Somewhere there. Find a bed and replace this reference with the updated one. And you can see that the changes are reflected in. So you don't have to manually move it around every time you make changes to it. So when you start, so if you have the whole scene blocked out to this stage right here, you can already just export all these objects as separate assets. And then you can model each asset in their own separate my file, and then you'll have them update in this scene file. And then you can kind of juggle different balls at the same time and don't really fuck everything up. So, and I can see if I can find the kit file. As you can see here, this is my asset folder. I make a folder with a prefix. So every prop, I name it prop_bed. And for assets that I create the scene with, like the set, the construction of the building, I name them set. It's just a scene organization tip that makes it easier to see where everything is. That was the wrong one. This is the whole kit I used to make the witch hut. So you can see they all share the same UVs in that are spaced in a good manner. And to texture these, I just used Mudbox and just found some texture photos and then just projected it on and kind of left it at that as a temporary solution. The problem with temporary textures is that they become very much final if you don't have time to change them later on. So be careful about what you make temporary and final. When I make shaders, I also try to do that out of the scene as well. Let's see if I have. I make a separate scene where I have a neutral light that I can experiment with shaders on. So if we, let's see, import. Add that. This is the bed with the textures on. So in this scene, I can start to tweak the shaders separately from the scene, because when you have a scene that has a bunch of colored lights, like you have a warm light here and a cold light there, it makes the shaders look different than if you had made them in an overcast environment. So I start by making a scene that has very neutral light that I know looks good, that is controlled. I usually just use an HDR map or something. Let's see. This is a render engine called Arnold, that when it loads everything up, it gives a real-time. Okay, this is not the right look. So let's see. Hide this one. I should have some lights here. This scene, let's see. Okay, let me just hide these for now. To create like a good base, like a good lighting base to start making shaders in, I just make a sky dome. I think it's called Dome Light or something in Studio Max. And then as the color, I plug in a file and an HDR map. So I think this one. So now it will use the image as a light source. We can plug it into the background so you can see it as well. Let's see. And if your HDR map is good, then you know that you only need that one sky dome with the image to make sure that your lighting is consistent and good. So now I can start adding shaders and tweak how much specularity I want and how much subsurface scattering and all that. I will then save out this model as its own file again with the shaders on and import it into the scene file where I have everything else. And then you might have to tweak the shaders to make it work with the lighting scenario you have in the scene. But it's a good base, and I think it's good that if you have one consistent lighting file that you make all the shaders in, you know that all your objects will look consistent and as if they work in the same universe. So there's nothing really special about this process other than like, once you have the hot down, it's all just the same props used over and over and just broken down to their simplest forms and then just worked on top of it. For the lighting in this scene, I used a sky dome around the whole scene to give it an overcast day, just as a base. And then you place the practical lights. I have a point light here, there, and there. Also a point light, kind of cheating a fire there. And for this smoke. And then you just basically let the render engine do its job. If you use a physically accurate renderer like Arnold, it doesn't really have to do much to make it look nice in terms of lighting. Let's see if I can show you the render passes I have. So this is the whole scene with just a dome light from the outside shining in. And you can see it already kind of looks plausible. But since the room is pretty tight with only a few holes in the walls to kind of let the light shine in, we need to add some more lights. These are all the practical lights in my scene with the lanterns. And then we add some backlight here just for dramatic effects. It has no logical reason to be there. It's just one big area light that I've stuck on the wall behind it, as if there was a giant sun there. It's not. But artistic license, we can do whatever we want. And then the smoke. And this is the kind of fog shader that you can use in Arnold, which I think sells the whole idea that it's kind of a wet place and in nature. And there you can see them being added together. It helps to light your scene in isolation. Like, if you try to put all your lights down at the same time, you don't really know what each light does. So it's really good to render, like, hide all the lights except the ones you work on, and kind of see what it does and see if it actually does anything. Because one common mistake I see when people start lighting their scenes is that they add a lot of lights without really knowing what they do, and then suddenly the whole scene starts slowing down. It won't render very fast, and you could just delete half of the lights and you wouldn't see a difference, but the render time goes much faster. So it's about being economical with your render power and the usage of lights. So once I have this render down, let's see. I start with the processing, which basically just makes them look pretty. I think this is what I started with in Photoshop. Like, I composited this in Nuke, which is a node-based compositing software, and started with this, and I added a depth of field because nothing is ever really sharp, and having like a blurry background kind of sells the idea that it's a photo or it's your eyes are focusing elsewhere. So it's not just a tool to make it look more believable, but it's also helping you focus on, like, directing the attention of the viewer. So if you want the attention to be on the foreground, you blur the background. Then I add a glow to all the light sources because glows are pretty and I'm cheap. And then I start like grading the lights a bit with just a curve modifier, or like, what would be the curve? Like, yeah. Is it called the curve? Yeah. Something like that. And then adding a little bit of lens distortion. And then it kind of looks more interesting to me, at least, or more believable compared to this. Another common mistake with all 3D beginners do is that everything is perfectly sharp. And if you look at a photo of anything, it's never really sharp. You either have a tiny shake in your hand, or something is out of focus, and there might be some scratches on the lens, maybe some noise because you've turned the ISO too high. And these are things you kind of want to consider when making the look of your final image. Like, how do I make this look believable and not CG? And compositing is like, this post-processing thing is helping that. I could even probably push this further in terms of making it look like a photo, but don't want to take it too far. It's already post-processed enough. Let's see if I have my render images compositing. We have Photoshop, yes. Also, when I work in what's called a linear workflow. And I save out my images in 32-bit. Let's see. What working in 32-bit images contain a lot more lighting information than regular 8-bit images do. So you get a lot of control when you want to change the look of it in the post-production phase. So if we start with the dome light, if this wants to open, and let's see, we want practical lights in. Wrong one. So now I have these two like render passes out, and we can set that to additive, and you can see that it adds the lighting information accurately without looking fake. And even if we want to, we could change the exposure of that layer. And since it's 32-bit, it will scale accurately. And making these kind of changes in 3D would be a bit difficult because then you would have to re-render every time, unless you have like a real-time preview. But like saving images as 32-bit and doing these things in post just makes it a lot easier to play with the final look of things. Let's see if I can find the last render pass. So something like this. Let's see if I can, if I were to take this to add all the depth of field and such, you would have to merge this down to an 8-bit color image again. So you want to make sure that all the grading and such is done at this stage. So you kind of work with the colors while you have them. So make a new document and convert to 8-bit. Combine. And I think, hopefully, I should have a C depth pass layer here rendered out. That didn't show much. No. So I don't have the C depth pass that I want to render this out with. But maybe I can. Oh, I've got to wait for that for another time, sadly. But yeah, once I have this 8-bit image, just use the color dodge, like the color tools, to change the look. And what I usually do is go to Filter and Lens Effects. And here you can add a vignette if you want. And it kind of also helps directing the focus to the center of the image. You can distort the lens here, just be a bit subtle with it. And a cheap effect that many people use is chromatic aberration, that kind of give this camera, like old camera feel. Here you can see the colors get a bit distorted. If you use it too much, it will look very much like a overused CG effects. But a little hint of it can add some slight blur to everything as well. And you don't really notice it. But you know, like, it feels better, at least to me. And let's see. I also usually add some noise. And you can see how much, like, just these small tweaks really like change the mood of the image. And I think that's a step that many people kind of forget in when they started with 3D, is that it has to look perfect when you render it. It doesn't. Like, much of the magic happens when you just take the 3D renders and tweak them as much as you can. And the 3D stage is more like giving you the ingredients to make this compositing the easiest. Let's see. I don't have Mudbox installed on this computer, so I can't really show how I texture things really dirty. But trust me, these textures here are as dirty as they get. I basically just used a photo and projected it onto this chest, and to get the color of it, and to get the slight bump information here, I just turned the diffuse color into black and white, and then tweaked the levels. And then it's just the shader doing the rest, and it looks pretty believable. But as you can see, if you take the temporary textures too far, you see that it doesn't really make much sense. But some things you can get away with, because you don't really notice that seam is there unless you really try to point it out. But that's the thing, like, you got to pick your battles, and not everything will be as the same level of finish as you want to. So you just got to know what will be in focus and not. That's why it's so important to plan ahead early on to see where is my focus point. And then you can plan around that and make sure that everything that is not the point of the image, you kind of don't prioritize that too much. When I make these skulls, like, they're not really, I didn't pay much attention to them. They're also pretty like cheap, but you can get away with it. Let's say prop skull. So to make a skull, I just quickly throw in a sphere. And hopefully the drivers for the Wacom is installed now so that it works. And I go to make Polymesh 3D and make it a Dynamesh. And let's see. And then you just sculpt in the basic form of the skull. Obviously using reference, so you know that it's anatomically correct and believable, at least pretend to. You can see that the geometry here is getting very distorted, so it's a bit difficult to sculpt on. But then we just remesh it, and it's like new. let's just say this is a human skull, just to make it easier. But imagine you worked on this for like an hour, and then you had a pretty decent skull at some point, and you want to have this in your scene. I would, since this is just a prop that is not going to be close up to the camera, it is not going to be animated or anything, I will be very, very dirty about this model. And at first I will decimate it to just make it more lightweight for the program to handle. Just eliminates a lot of polygons. And just go to series measure, turn down the target polygon count, and it will give it somewhat okay topology for what the purpose is. And let's see, still on. But it also needs UVs, so I just go into the UV master and then just tell it to unwrap, and it will make automatic UVs for you. Again, they're not really, the seams won't be perfect, but if you use 3D painting like Mudbox or something, then you can just paint out the seams so they won't be noticeable. And this would be good enough to kind of, if I subdivide this a few more times, okay, I deleted original, so let's just duplicate it and repeat the process without, with having the original sculpt still intact. Let's see, geometry. And then UV master, unwrap. So you can see how quick and dirty this is. And then subdivide it. And then we can project the details from this onto this. So now you have the model with proper topology and UVs and the sculpting details that you can then export displacement maps for and all that jazz. And then you can just export it. Let's see. So this is a problem you can have when you start with the model in ZBrush, is that it looks tiny when you import it into the scene that is modeled to scale. So that's why I usually start with the base mesh in Maya first, model to the correct proportion and size I wanted to, and import that as a base mesh. Because now I have to scale this in, scale to its size, and re-import it into ZBrush. And now I can just take this model and duplicate it over and have it on my imaginary shelf that I used in this there. So as long as you kind of break it down, all the different assets, like these jars, they're just jars. There's no really complicated modeling here. Same thing with this stethoscope. You don't really notice it in the scene, but it's kind of hanging there. But it's a very simple model. This heart, I did the exact same process I did with the skull. I just blocked it out in ZBrush with clay, and then remeshed it, UV'd it, and call it done. Doesn't need any more. And yeah, as long as you break it up, you can just, then environment modeling just becomes of making a lot of simple objects and just make a lot of them and just populate the scene. And then add some lights and make it look pretty. And that's my general workflow for how I made this Woodshots image. And that's it. And also, remember that if you want a badge for having attended one of these lectures, you can use your badge on that yellow screen over there, and then you get a badge. Is there anything more? And then you have to go to Infodesk to collect it. And that's it for me. If any of you guys have any questions or you want feedback to anything you've done or just want to chat about 3D, please just let me know. I sit around, I sit on the aisle with the flags there, and I sit with the blue flag. Just tap me on the shoulder if there's anything, and I'll be happy to help, because I have nothing more to do this weekend.